Good morning and welcome to Saturday special of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Well, we are always concerned when the GDP falls and nothing happens. There's no earthquake, there's no tempest. India's GDP has fallen to 4.5 and there is a political earthquake. As a matter of fact, the noise that is created at GDP, even here, is absolutely irrelevant. I have written many times, and so have many other economists, that depending on GDP as a measure of success in this era, the fourth industrial revolution, is absolutely wrong. As a matter of fact, depending on GDP in this era adversely affects policy decisions. And the main reason is technology as a product and a deflationary effect. And we ignore that technological progress, which has deflationary effect, and are concerned with GDP. But I was really astonished when I saw the former Prime Minister of India, Manmohan Singh, who is reputed to be a great economist, proved his absolute stupidity and ignorance when he criticized the falling of the GDP. Maybe what he learned was 17th century and is not relevant today. He is not aware of the parameters of the fourth industrial revolution in which we are living. Why are we bothered about the GDP, which is not relevant? Secondly, GDP by itself is not important. Another major issue, I'm not going into the major economic parameters, I'm going into a simple thing which you will understand. Inflation. When Manmohan Singh criticized Modi for lower GDP, he forgot that the GDP in his own time was 4.3% and inflation was 15%. Now, let's accept that the GDP is 4.5% in the second quarter. In the first quarter, it was 6%. When accepting 4.5% was the inflation rate, 2.8%. So, with that, GDP is still plus, while in that case, real GDP was minus 11%. In Canada, if GDP is 2% and inflation is 1.5%, that means it's plus 0.5%. So, GDP by itself has no meaning. Consider it, take care of it along with the inflation. Forget about that even. Now let's come to that. The strongest supporter of Narendra Modi believed before this election that economic slowdown because of demonetization, GST, would cause BJP majority. Did it? No, because people are not concerned with it. GDP growth was down to 5% in the first 3 months of the fiscal economics, and it was expected to drop. Secondly, it's a global phenomenon. You do not expect to be living in an island cut off from the global forces. And pundits would say that Modi is relying too much on repeal of 370, NRC, Ram Mandir. They lose the momentum as he fixes the economy. Agreed. Modi knows instinctively that the mainstream economic data, GDP, IIP, inflation, gives only a partial picture where the market rules for a large chunk of Indians and for humanity all over the world. The most important thing is, what are they getting at? Now let's take India as an example since we started with that. India has about 89 crore people in the working age between the age of 15 to 65. Out of those, 82 to 83 crore are above the age of 18. That means they are entitled to vote. Now, according to Center for the Monitoring Indian Economy, only 40.5 crore work. That means 50% work. Whatever the others, they are casual workers. They are in the unorganized sector. And out of them, 2 crore are in higher education, 6 to 7 crore are too old to work. So really there's no unemployment. And there are really only about 20 crore who are really employed, or they have stopped working because of the welfare activities and their desire not to work. Some people don't work at all. They want to be parasites. They are there. How do they survive? Begging, working on the homesteads, casual jobs, snatching, and even law and order issues, theft, pickpocketing, and like that, which is no work. Now, are the poorest people worse off under Modi? If you look at it, the result would be no. Now, look at, and why do I say it? Look at the consumption pattern. If I look at the consumption pattern, I find that the consumption has increased. Now, if the income of the people has decreased, how can they spend more? Evidently, they have other sources of income which they are using, whether they are assets or whatever it is. And let me tell you, Indian culture background is people normally do not sell their assets to go in and splatter in luxuries. They might do it in necessities. And the latest data, if I see, for the first time in 40 years, rural consumption has dropped by 8.8%. Now you'll say, well, I'm contradicting. No, it has dropped by 8.8% because the rural people have left for the cities. And that's why the urban consumption has increased by 20%. So 8.8% drop, 20% increase. There's a balance. You understand that? In both the cases. Now, it's the rich people who have cut on the consumption because they have got everything. But the poor people are spending more. And now, one thing more interesting, they are not spending on non-food items. When people earn less, they spend on food items. When they earn more, food has already been taken care of. Clothing has already been taken care of. Then they start spending on comforts. And they can still afford, they can start spending on luxuries. So there are three tiers: necessities, comforts, and luxuries. Here, we have seen that the expenditure is more on the comforts and more on the luxuries. Is it because of the misplaced priorities of the people? Well, it can be if it was limited to a number of people. But when 1.3 billion out of them, 90% are increasing their expenditure, that definitely is not erratic behavior. That means that they have got a surplus money. So the fall of GDP based on the certain archaic principles which have no relevance today is not valid. It is valid. And then imagine, now what have they increased the expenditure on? If I go in by CMI parameters and their result, they say they are spending more on education, they are spending more on health and on telecom services. With that being so, how do we say that the falling GDP is reflective of failure of the economy? It's not. As a matter of fact, the reality is that the people in India, even the poorest people, I'm not talking about the top 10%, 20%. I'm talking of the poorest of the poor. They're better off than they were 6 years ago. Don't be shocked. Most poor people living in the towns and the cities have one foot in the village. So they go to the village, during the harvest time and during the sowing time, work there, come back to the city. That is an extra income they have earned in the shape of the goods, the vegetables, the grains, the rice, wheat, corn, pulses, they bring them with them. When they return to the city, they bring them. And when the crops fetch good prices, everything gets sold. And the poor buy food throughout the year. There, have you heard of the famines which used to stalk India at one time? You haven't. Why? Because people today can afford to buy and are more concerned with the people having surplus money that they can afford to buy not only the necessities but also indulge in comforts and splatter in luxuries at times. How many cars are there? The middle class family today has 2 to 3 cars. The poor, so-called poor, are having water air coolers, they are having mobile phones, and they have got all the facilities which you have. So what are we talking about? The truth is that if the analysis believe in the drop in consumption pattern indicates an overall poverty, they have got to accept that increase in pattern in the bottom 30% shows. Bottom 30% I'm talking about, there is an increase in pattern according to CMI that their incomes has gone up. And now I'm not talking of the nominal income, I'm talking of the real income. Take a closer look at the rural consumption data, which I just collected it. The poorest of 10% in the villages have cut down their expenditure on food. You see, when you grow rich, you don't spend so much on food, you cut the expenditure because you are having more luxuries. So, why? They have cut down because they have increased in air. So, why? Because they have got a larger proportion of their wages in kind than 6 years ago. The food is plenty, so the farmer gives to the workers food, not the money. But the money's purchasing value is more, so what they were spending on food, now they are spending on the comforts. So real income has increased. The monetary exchange may be less, but the barter which has entered into in the rural, and 70% of the Indian population is in the rural areas. Secondly, have you seen that when the richest stop spending and they reduce the consumption, it leaves a mark. We say cars are not selling. So what? Do we have sufficient space to the roads? And do we want pollution? White goods have no takers. That's good enough. The stock of the unsold house is increasing. So what? But look at the restaurant. They are running full. People have to wait for at one time for hours to get into a restaurant. That sort of thing was not there earlier. So the monthly car sales numbers, housing, these are the parameters which are going in GDP, and they are not relevant in a society like India. When the poorest people increase their spending on non-food items, it doesn't show up as a blip on the economic data. That's the unfortunate part. They have their own sample, and based on the sample they collected, they say GDP has fallen, as if there's an earthquake and a tsunami of it, and a disaster after disaster is coming. No, it's not that. The reality is that the real income of the people is increasing. Their purchasing power is increasing. And if we look at PPP, purchasing power parity, that is a much higher level today. So Modi is understanding that. He understands that those affected by the domain of GDP, those people don't even go and give their vote. They talk a lot in the clubs, having a glass of beer or whiskey with a cigarette and sitting in Gymkhana club, talking all the high faulting terms which has absolutely no relevance. And that's why any sensible political leader can ignore it. When the employment is rising, when the real income of people is rising, GDP based on certain parameters is absolutely irrelevant. And again, the fourth industrial revolution in which we are living has clearly indicated that there's more dependence on technology, and GDP as a measure of success is irrelevant, outmoded concept, and reliance on that is injurious to the health of the nation. That being so, you need not worry about falling GDP. See how the people are splitting and how the real income is growing. That is more important. And are the people satisfied? The results, election results are always an indicator of that. So let's wait, watch, and amuse ourselves with the antics of these so-called intellectuals and economists who do not understand the realities. Thank you.